Do good work is not a label, but a way of living. It is the constant and diligent effort to achieve a new level of excellence in one's own life. It is the hidden inner beauty behind the struggle to achieve excellence. It's not perfect, but imperfect. It is the effort, discipline, and focus that often goes unnoticed. The goal of Do Good Work is to highlight that drive. The guests I have on this show emulate this drive in their own special way. You'll be able to apply new ideas into your own life by learning from them. We will also have one-on-one episodes with me where we'll dive into my own experience with entrepreneurship and leadership. Every episode is designed to provide you with ideas that you can apply and grow in excellence in all areas of your life, business, and career.
Today on the show, we have Sean Patton. As a U.S. Army Airborne Ranger and Special Forces Green Beret Commander, Sean has earned the respect of his men and chain of command while operating in hostile and politically sensitive environments. Now in the private sector, he has applied these lessons in new ways of growing his own companies and helping others through his business, Stronger Leaders, Stronger Profits. As his business and leadership coach, Sean trains business leaders to lead people and manage systems more effectively, decrease inefficiencies, create more sustainable growth, and improve profitability. He's on the mission to help people see themselves the way that he sees them, as powerful individuals with unlimited potential. He's a firm believer that we need each other to perform at our best so that we can create the world we all deserve. Sean, thank you so much for being on, man.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
Sean, before we dive deep into strategy, leadership, and the whole person concept, can we dive a little bit more about your background and who you are so we better understand your methodology, your ideology, as well as how that applies to the work that you're doing?
For sure. I'll give you the brief overview. So I spent basically my entire young adult life in the military. 3 weeks out of high school, I went to the United States Military Academy at West Point and spent 4 years there. Pretty intense leadership, laboratory, and educational experience. And then after that, I commissioned as an officer in the U.S. Army Infantry. And I spent my first few years there as a rifle platoon leader out kind of with the front combat troops, and then also took over the recon and sniper platoon for the battalion and spent 14 months in Iraq doing that. Came back, went to Special Forces selection, got selected and finished training and got my Green Beret, and then went to 5th Special Forces Group where I was a Special Forces Detachment Commander and in Afghanistan, kind of on the Pakistan border. Again, all this just highlighting cramming a lot of leadership lessons into a very condensed timeline. And then I was lucky enough to get a second command. I took over a Special Forces combat diver underwater infiltration team and got done with that, did about a year of staff time and realized I had done all the fun stuff and I wanted a new challenge. And I always admired entrepreneurs and people who kind of bet on themselves and went all in without a safety net. And I was like, well, if I admire these people and that mindset, then I think it's time for me to do that. And throughout that whole time as a leader in the military, as an officer, everyone sort of has a part of that job, and it's that same way I think in any job, right? Like everybody has parts of their job that they're like, I love this part, and because I love this part, I deal with these other things, and everybody has that. And, for some people it's the organization, the structure. For some people it's the missions. For some people they're like the range guy, right? Like to go out and just shoot and blow up stuff and just like run around the woods, and that's their thing. For me, it was always two things. It was always leadership and problem solving. And that's what I loved about my time there. And I think that was always my strength was, really it was the reason I went in the Army versus some of the other armed services. I applied like Naval Academy, Air Force Academy, that sort of thing. And as soon as I got into West Point, I actually canceled those applications because I knew I wanted to go somewhere where my primary the leadership over my primary weapon system, my primary effect that I wanted to have, I wanted it to be people. And sometimes if you're like a Air Force pilot, I mean, you fly your jet, it's just you and maybe one other person in it and everybody else is back on the ship somewhere. And like your primary delivery effect system is this thing. And then in the infantry, you show up 23 years old and I've got 35 individuals. Like, how do you get those individuals to accomplish something? And then the complexity, intensity of that sort of just ramped up till you're doing more politically sensitive operations in different areas in special forces. And so I got to really do that. And I knew I wanted to do that in the private sector, but I didn't want to be the military guy who gets out and he's like, all right, business leaders, let me tell you how to run your company. And unfortunately, there's a few that try that. It's like, I knew enough to know that this was going to be different and I needed some more experiences. So I told myself, even though I know that training and teaching and working with leaders and solving complex problems is what I want to do, I need to do two things in the private sector before I'm comfortable stepping out into that world and claiming sort of that position for myself, which is a formal education. So I went and got my MBA from UNC Chapel Hill. And then I said, well, I also need to start a company. It's kind of like, I kind of think of entrepreneurs and small business owners as like the special forces of the business world, right? It's like, they're like the do more with less. You're out there on your own, sort of ambiguous. No one's telling you do A, B, C. You have to figure out A, B, and C is. And so I wanted to delve into that and learn those lessons and start my own company. And I went out and started my first company. And you know what? I did some great things, did some not great things, ended up failing, ended up having to closing it, went through that process of learning and relaunched new company in the same space and with a few new partners. And now that company, fortunately, has grown to be the fastest growing martial arts company in the Southeast. And we've grown to 3 locations with almost 500 members in 3 years. And that's been a really great experience. So because of all those things wrapped up, I decided it was time to launch my Stronger Leaders, Stronger Profits company. And now I do leadership and business coaching and consulting. And it's been a really great experience so far. I'm excited about it. I love working with clients to really delve into some of these topics and experiences I've had and sort of combine that special forces military leadership with the business lessons. And I sort of combine those together to, I think, provide a unique approach to problems that is different than sort of a lot of sort of standard business practices that you get, through formal business education or through sort of standard stuff before.
Yeah, I think that's important. We'll dive into that in a bit for the strategy. But before we do, I just want to take some time to thank you and your team for everything that you've done, especially your time in the Army and the Special Forces as well. And moving from there as well, I love the fact that you wanted to do before you teach, before you actually help others do. You went out there to say, I'm actually going to throw myself in the environment so I can experience what those I'm going to help experience. And that takes a lot of time, effort, and discipline, because you have to go through that first before you say, I'm just going to go and teach it instead of doing it. So it's more of a holistic approach instead of just an approach of from lecturing on the lecture side. So I love that fact. Entrepreneurs for entrepreneurs, which is extremely valuable. And that takes us to the strategic view. And I'm really curious, how do you look at strategy? Because you married it with leadership and solving unique problems, which in itself creates strategy. But how would you describe strategic thinking to leaders and organizations?
So I always start with effects when I think about strategic planning. So I think too often human beings in general, but in our sort of world, leaders, right? We don't set up a disciplined process to evaluate problems before we start solving them. And it's immediately like, what's going on? Okay, well, what can we do about it? You jump right to possible solutions. And then you start looking at those instead of really taking time to evaluate the problem first, right? I think it was Albert Einstein who said, somebody asked if he had 60 minutes to solve a problem that was going to save the world, what would he do? He said, I'd spend 55 minutes defining the problem and 5 minutes solving it, right? And that's a route that I think doesn't get taken enough. And so I always focus on what's the problem and what effects or what things are you trying to solve down the road, and then look at what are the variables affecting this decision? Like what's actually affecting the status quo in the market, and what can you change? What can't you change? What resources do you have available?
And the constraints as well, right?
Constraints. Yeah. Resources, variables, constraints, really take time to look at all those things. And once you do that and you look at what effect am I trying to have? What do I have available to me? And what's the real root problem? Because a lot of times with some of these, someone comes up with a problem and it ends up, that's really just a symptom. So you have to, I feel like a lot of times you have to really dig deeper. Yeah. Yep. When you go deeper and then you start realizing, oh yeah, we're not getting enough customers in the afternoon to walk in the door. Well, okay, that's a symptom of something else. Like why, just keep asking you why, be like that annoying, 3-year-old, but why? And sometimes I think it's the job of a coach is just to be that, well, why? Okay, I get that, but why? And just keep going until you can really get to the bare bones root cause. And then I like to lead people through a process of identifying a few different courses of action and then leading people to develop multiple courses of action and compare those. So when you develop a course of action, you can't just look at them and kind of compare them immediately. You have to develop some sort of evaluation criteria. And so when it comes to the effects you want to have, one of the most important things you do is develop an evaluation criteria. Like plan A, just innocuous blank slate, plan A, plan B, plan C, no matter what's in there. What are you looking for? Like, is it important that this problem is scalable? Is it important that a solution has a low barrier of entry cost? Is it, what are you actually going to evaluate just random plan on or random solution on and develop those out first, then look at what's been developed. And that way you have a concrete set of criteria that you are evaluating each potential solution against, and you're not getting caught up in sort of the emotional. It allows you to be more objective to look your at the evaluation outcome. Yes. So that's really the process like that.
First of all, thank you for breaking that down, because that was very in-depth and thorough. And I actually, in the daily blog that I write, the Daily Spark, this morning, I was writing about the primer of strategic thinking. And we went through those 3 steps of understanding something. Most of your time needs to understand what it is, why it is what it is, who set it up that way, and why did they set it up, and is that the right way? So really looking at fully understanding. So it's the first act of the mind, to understand, to know. The second one is to communicate. Obviously, to communicate what you know to another individual so that they can conceive that same outcome. And then the third one, this one is where you elaborate much more, and I love that, is evaluating the outcomes based on the actual goal and objective. And I think that can be very lost, especially when it's like, oh, here's a solution. This is the only one we got. Let's go with it, as opposed to what are the other possible outcomes. So I think that was very valuable to look at solutions strategically, not just understanding the problem strategically.
Yeah, absolutely. And the interesting part is what I've done is I've adapted a problem-solving methodology that we actually used in special forces because for the business world. Because, for example, say a big, I'll give a real world example. This is a couple years before my time, but the same group I was in. So 2001, 9/11 happens, right? 5th Special Forces Group, which is assigned to that part of the world, gets alerted, and they take, I think it was 36 teams, 12-man teams. And whenever we go to plan for big missions, they put us in an isolation facility. So they take away our phones, they take away everything. You have this little pod that you eat, sleep, and live with your team for 4 days to plan this mission. You get a mission, you plan it, you go through a similar process to what I just described. And at the end of that, then every team briefs their plan. And so in 4 days, you went from, I don't know why we're here, to here's a complete problem or a complete mission with all the logistics worked out, with all the contingency plans in place. And our plan is to basically go to Afghanistan and overthrow an existing government. So 12 guys in a room being like, I'm going to overthrow a country, and give me 4 days to plan, and then go through that whole intensive process. And the way it works in special forces is they basically pick the top third of the teams in their plans, and they got to go to Afghanistan and execute the mission. Everybody else, all right, thanks for being here, go home. And so it's not just everybody gets to go. It's you have to develop a plan, and the amount, like that intensive process. So I've tried to take that, change it, and adapt it to the business world and teach it, because if you can take 12 guys in a room isolated, and they can go from I don't know what's going on to fully understanding the problem, developing multiple courses of action, and then briefing to senior political officials their plan to do that in 4 days, plus they were sleeping and eating with breaks in between. I feel like we can use that similar process to really tackle large business problems and make businesses better.
How have you been able to dissect that? Because that's pretty intense to solve. I mean, that's a huge Goliath problem. And I'm pretty sure that any other business problem that we come across is not even like a tenth of that issue. How do you adapt something that's so big picture and macro into more of an actual tactical for small business, for entrepreneurs, for organizations?
So it really, just to kind of circle back to the first time we talked about this a few minutes ago, I think that the main thing is just identifying the problem. And the beautiful part about really any framework, and one of the things I love about what you do with Productive Profits and Insights is you're such a framework driven person, right? You're such a systems guy. And that's kind of how my mind works too. And that's how this strategic planning process framework works is you insert a problem and then, redefine it. And then as you define it with like, well, what things are actually affecting this? What effects is this problem having? How do, it doesn't matter if that discussion is sort of huge meta geopolitical in its nature. Like we have this group, the Taliban, who has a government that is oppressing their people and harboring terrorists, and it's causing, so you can do that and then delve into what's our specific role within that larger problem. Okay. Yeah. Like within this larger place, these 12 guys, what region are we going to go to? What little thing are we trying to affect in that region to have a certain outcome to support a larger mission? And in business, it's honestly not that much different. It's like, hey, we're losing market share in this area. And it's sort of this big, the industry's economic trends are going this way and they're affecting it. Right. But you just dial it down to what can we affect and what piece of that larger problem are we really solving as a small business owner? And when you do that, you can use the same framework to get more customers into your, in the afternoon into your bakery as you can to overthrow another government. If it's really, the framework is that flexible if you set it up correctly. And I've been able to, coach that. We were talking before, we started here with, corporate clients with, 18 regional managers across North America, all the way down to, a small regional home builder that's trying to, sync their organizational practices to create more efficiency in a home builder process. So you can really scale it up and down as long as you stick within the framework and don't create a framework that only can work in certain instances and is reliant on a certain problem set.
So it's much more flexible. Is there a certain time frame that you suggest for business owners to be able to dissect that? Is it like an hour call with a leadership team and being able to dissect and identify the problem first, and then a second hour call to identify problems? Like, how do you leverage the existing knowledge base that team members have? Like, let's say for leadership team, implementation team, as well as from outside vendors that could have a solution. How do you facilitate all of that? Do you suggest that leaders do this an all day intensive with their teams? Is it just an hour? Is it an hour a week? Is it an hour for a month? Like how does this process look like tactically when you're applying it to business?
So if it depends, right, on, a lot of times it's time available, right? A lot of times it's like, well, we would love, in a perfect world, we'd love to sit down, create our own isolation facility for 4 days and let's get after it. But, trying to get a whole business team to lock themselves up in a, Marriott for 4 days is probably not going to happen. So, so a lot of times it's just time available, but optimally what I've seen work best and what I sort of recommend is doing sort of 2 group get-togethers. So the first one, it takes at least an hour probably to just go through the process and sort of train everybody up on that. And then once everybody kind of understands the process, break them out into teams and then start really defining, basically you can get through define the problem, identifying resource constraints. And then a lot of times, depending on the complexity, you may need a break of at least a few days to go out and actually research and get answers. Yeah. You don't want to rush unless you have, all the data available. But a lot of times you're like, oh gosh, I don't know what software is available to potentially solve this solution. Oh, I really don't know what is, what the downstream or upstream logistical costs are that affect this problem, So a lot of times you have to define it and then break away for a short period, kind of do research, come back together, and then do a briefing and sort of knowledge share of, this is what we found, then develop courses of action, potential solutions. Then you need time for teams to go out and research and come back together. So there's sort of like an initial need to come together as a group, usually some sort of time apart, to go out and research and, again, really define that problem and come back, knowledge share, develop, and just determine 2 or 3 possible solutions. Then those teams need time to go out to fully develop their plan, and then come back and brief their different courses of action, make an evaluation and comparison, and do develop and decide on a final solution. So for that. Yeah. So sometimes, it can be done in a workshop format, in a full day, if it's really intensive. But what I found is, if we get sort of 3 2-hour blocks, maybe spaced out by a week or so, virtually, that can be done too. And obviously, as you know, it's a virtual world now. So that's pretty good. It takes more time than it would in person, when you have to interact with a group through, Zoom or some other platform.
But that's promising, though, being able to identify, if I have a big problem, to estimate maybe 6 to 10 hours, saying that's how long it's actually going to take to map it out. And
Absolutely.
Even the mindset of going into it, understanding we don't have to know all the answers. At least we know the path to understanding, getting answers in tangible tactics. I think this also stems a deeper seated issue that we can dive into. You talked about different teams, different groups, communications, and making sure that we share our ideas. And one of the things that I definitely preach about is to not have silos in the communication gap. One of the key things, though, is miscommunication, or communicating information that gets translated or doesn't get fully transmitted in its full intent, so that teams do something else other than what they were communicated to do. So can we dive into how you strategically break down communication gaps or communication issues between teams, departments, or even within individuals?
Absolutely. And I agree 100% with everything you just said, right? That if you honestly look at your organization, whether it's a small business or a Fortune 500 company, almost every business failure, a failure to communicate effectively was either the reason for it, or at least a contributing factor to almost every failure you have in an organization, almost all the time. And I think, and coming from the military, especially coming from, spending a lot of time overseas and in deployment, where clear communication is emphasized and is literally, life or death, right? If you give someone a quick, hey, I need you to go up here and do this thing, take these people, blah, blah, and you give them the whole, if you're not able to effectively get that communication out and have it be clearly understood and executable, that means people may not come home. And so it's something that over time as an officer, I developed, and I took kind of a few different doctrinal pieces from operations orders and troop leaders procedures and all these other things that the military uses. And I started using that toward the end of, my military career with my special forces teams, and found it to be highly effective. And I sort of wired that tight. And what I've done is now take that, and now I use that in the business sector. So I use what we call, or what I call, the 5 Bravo communication method. So the 5 components are task, purpose, intent, end state, and timeline. And the B is back brief. And so what that looks like in terms of, tactical practice, right? And then we'll kind of talk about the implications of using this or not using it. Is, if task is usually pretty straightforward. What do you want done?
Yeah.
Purpose is the why behind it. Why does this need to get done? And then also, what impact does this have on the larger organization, right? If you're a marketing or a marketing team, the why needs to also include how this impacts sales, or how this impacts your creative team, or how this impacts other things. So they understand the context for the task you're asking them to do. And it's not, like, as you said, just like a silo of your task inside your little team, but how does it impact other things, right? Then you have intent. Intent is expanded purpose. And for simple things, this could be very short or almost non-existent. But for others, this is where you put things in, like constraints, resources available, and then also any how, right? One of the important things when you task people in your organization to get things done is you want to give them as little how as possible, right? I don't want to constrain their thinking and their actions any more than I possibly have to. So sometimes as long as they accomplish what you want to accomplish and you just tell them, I want you to have this effect and do this thing. And I don't really care. I mean, right, as long as it's legal, you do it. Like, that's awesome, right? I don't want to have to. I'm not paying you to be a robot and, just be an extension of my limbs doing the way I would want to do it. I want you to solve the problem. But sometimes there is a how, right? There is a certain, by the way, I need you to use a certain software. I need you to use a certain format. I need you to look at this certain thing. I need you to, sometimes there's a specific reason you want them to do a thing a certain way. And that how goes into intent, right? Then in state is, right, when it's all done, right? When you come up to me like, Sean, complete, mission done. Here's the thing. What does that look like? Like, to me, what's success? How do I want that to appear when you're done? What effects am I trying to have? What does this thing look like? And you want to really clearly communicate that. Again, we're focusing on effects and end states, not the actual steps to accomplish that. We want to empower people to do that themselves. And then the last thing there is timeline. And this is the one that, especially in the private sector, I found people neglect and causes more issues than almost anything else, but it's also the simplest to fix, right? You go up, you say, hey, hey, Bill, I need you to get me that, quarterly report as soon as you get a chance. I'm doing something, I need it to, develop my own report to hire. Okay, no problem. And then the next day you're like, Bill, what's up, bro? Like, where's the report? He's like, oh, I haven't got a chance yet. So if you tell someone when you get a chance, or if you just leave it ambiguous, that means forever. Like, that's on you as the leader, right? When you get a chance, or, hey, and as soon as you can, whatever, however you say it, you need to give them date and time, right? This is a certain, hey, I need it on my desk or in my inbox by 4 p.m. tomorrow, whenever. And you can also obviously put intermediate timelines if it is a longer process. Hey, we're going to do a check-in next Friday at 3 p.m. or whatever, but a specific timeline and expectation has to be put there. If there's no numbers or dates or times involved, then you might have told them, hey, before I die, could you get this done? Because that's what you're saying in real life, right? Yeah. And then, so what you finish that whole process, and then this is for some people the most awkward part, but what I tell my clients is once you accept it and own it, is like, I do this every time, people will adapt to you, which is back brief, right? So you finish and you said, all right, Bill, so and you can even say, hey, remind me again, what I tell you about that report? He'd be like, I need to do my quarterly report, and I need to get it to you, by 4 p.m. tomorrow. And it needs to be in a PDF format. I'm going to use this, logo. I'm going to have, whatever. And it's going to cover from the last 6 quarters. And then, good job, Bill, you got it. But what you'll find is almost every time something is left out, it's changed, right? Like you said, the communication piece, from what's in my head to how I process it, I put it out into the air, it went through your ear, you went to your brain, and how you process it, something is going to be changed or lost in translation. And that back brief is your time when they say back to you to clarify and make sure that you both have a clear understanding of the expectations to solve that problem. So that's the 5B, task, purpose, intent, end state, timeline, back brief. And when you follow that process, I find that it solves almost every single communication problem in your business. It just takes the self-discipline to do that every single time.
To actually apply it. And going back to the intent and the fact that you leave out the how, I think this is really important, especially, I have a couple questions, but I think this is really important, especially for when you hire someone in your team, or you have someone taking ownership of a specific department. You hire them because they should be smarter than you in that specific domain. You didn't hire someone just to push buttons, that you can use a tool or an automation for that. I find sometimes with organizations that we want to SOP everything, like document everything. And I think that's important, to document the essential things. Like, this is the Sean Patton way of doing things. This is our, signature way of doing things. And I get that. I think it's important to have documented. And this is coming from the guy who wrote the book on how to document stuff, right?
Yeah.
But let's burn your SOPs for a second and really assess what are the important ones of your signature way of doing things. And how can you just have your team creatively come up with new solutions for what you currently do? Because I think that we might tend to over document every little thing, and it leaves out the purpose. Like, well, why do you have a manager in place if you're just going to have a document dictating what they do? At this point, you should just create a software, oh, but a software can't think this way. Of course they can, right? Because the software can't empathize. The software can't understand to the level of essence as, humans can. So I love that you leave that out, because this is almost like balancing, when should we document something as opposed to when should we leave it up to interpretation and creative solution, problem solving. And then the best solution, maybe we can document that if we can repeat the same process over time, but then also not letting that solution be go stale and old, saying, hey, we've been doing this for the last 20 years. Like, well, it's time to readapt. It's time to change. It's time to enhance. What can we be doing better? And the back brief, I really do appreciate that a lot, especially when it comes to like the Slack world, the Messenger world, the Teams world. We just say, hey, I got it. And then we never really get it. Or communications is like, I want you to do this one thing. And people on the other side of the Zoom call are saying, yeah, we got it. And, things change. It's not the fact that people aren't intelligent enough. I just think that there's so much coming at us that if we have some simple way of documenting a task and action orientation, what needs to be happening, what needs to be done, how it needs to be done, or like not the how, but like when it should be done, clearly communicating and giving peace to the other person of not having to worry about it, like, hey, they got it, they own it.
Yeah, for both, right? And I'm with you 100%, right? There are some, like, if you're talking about somebody like at the cash register level, right? Like making a sale, entry level thing, this is how you do your sales call. This is how you check someone out. You have those SOPs to that low level, but yeah, that's why you hire managers and leaders to solve problems. And you're talking about, we have a real strategic problem that we're trying to solve. If the answer was easy, or if it was just out there, well, then you just see it implemented, right? It's like, it's simple. Like, this is a standard practice for a reason or whatever. But if it's a new problem, or, even if just in your day-to-day sort of culture, I think it's important to have the culture of not micromanaging the how of all your teammates, because again, that's what you're paying them to come up with great new solutions. And how powerful is that if you have a whole team of people that the leader is great at defining what things need to be very specific and need to follow an SOP for a certain reason, and only those things, and everything else you're entrusting your team to innovate and come up with new creative solutions, and you're empowering them to think that way. Imagine the additional capacity you gain after operating a team like that for 2 to 3 years, like where your company's going to head, versus if, you basically make yourself the bottleneck of the how-tos for your whole company. And it's just your brain with a bunch of arms out there, as opposed to the 30 brains on your team all operating independently.
Leveraging that. And I think that's important too, because sometimes some industries have constraints, like for compliance, like if you're in
Exactly.
like finance, FINRA, or whatever industry that you're in, there's always this either governing board or larger constraints. So yeah, we have to do this a certain way. So there is not that much, creative thought or expression that we can have in solving a problem. But for everything else, when you discern what should be documented and followed and what should follow the 5 Bravo communication method, do you implement this in all tiers of communication within the team, or is this just specific for big strategic problems or problems that need to have new solutions or innovation?
I try to get people. So I'd like to do this at all levels. That being said, right, once you start implementing this, it's like any new skill, right? Like athletically, I don't know. I'm not a big golfer. Let's say a golf swing, right? Like you start. We
can talk jiu-jitsu if you want.
Oh, jiu-jitsu. Okay, we can. So like you teach a new move, and you tell. Jiu-jitsu is a great example, right? My company's lead jiu-jitsu. I teach jiu-jitsu, and so when you first teach someone like a certain move, it has to be because it's new, and they're new to it. Just like when you first use 5 Bravo, like you may need to write it down on a piece of paper and look down and get it every time. Just like if I teach you a choke, I'll be like, your hand goes this way. You're going to pull in this direction. Your elbows have to come to your ribs. Like you walk through, and they have to do that step by step. Cause it's like a baby learning to walk, you have to go that. But then by the time you do that years and years and years later, or you get more comfortable with the process and more professional with it, you can manipulate it to be what you want, right? You can take different pieces and put them together. So once you use this process, maybe you don't need to go into, maybe you recognize there is an SOP already, and you don't need, again, you just say, hey, as per SOP, or, hey, do that. Or, it's just implied, and you know what pieces of this 5 Bravo you put together. But when you first start out, I think it's important to go through it. But this is just effective communication in my mind that applies not just in strategic, big problems or creative problems, but this is day-to-day world. This is like interpersonal relationships, right? Like I had a senior executive I was working with and doing a coaching call with, like a couple months, I think it was November. Yeah. I don't even know when it is. Yeah. A couple months ago, right? 6 weeks ago. And, and he was talking about, he was having issues with his teenage son, right? Like just getting him, just normal teenage stuff. And we went through this 5 Bravo, and we used an example. So he used the 5 Bravo with his kids, I need you to, clean your room. And what does that mean? Well, that means this is put away and this is done. And this, that sort of thing. It needs to be done by this time, blah, blah. All right. What I say, all right, I'm going to clean my room and blah, blah. And guess what? He's like, yeah, my 13-year-old son actually started doing it. Like, we effectively communicated. He understood what I wanted. The expectations were clear. The expectations for, what, I forgot he got some reward, he got to go out, and stay out late or get $20 or something if he did over a period of time, right? Like, there was some reward, but he clearly understood what was expected of him. And I think this really, and so you can use this with your kids and your, spouses. Just be really careful with spouses with the whole, tell me what you said, what I just told you. You may want to give them a little preface, fair warning before it. By the way, I'm trying this new thing. You can also play dumb. That's what I usually do with my wife. I'm like, wait, I totally forgot what I just told you. Remind me what I told you. And she's like, well, I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. But I think that really kind of brings us to the true power of using this 5 Bravo methodology, and why I think it can be used in small or big problems is, say I do this in my own business, right? I give a task out to someone, one of my managers or something, and they get done. And I'm like, it's not what I wanted. It didn't get done right. And so before I, jump on them, or I stop and pause and, have my little bubble go above my head and think, okay, did I give them the 5 Bravo? Wait a minute. Did I give them tap? Did I give them all those components and do a back brief? And if I missed something, that's on me. That's a leadership failure. That's a learning opportunity for me as the leader, because I didn't communicate effectively with them and give all the tools they needed to satisfy the requirements I was asking of them. Right. So I'm like, my bad, let's do this again and go through it. Right. That's a leadership opportunity to improve your communication. Now, if you did do that, if I said, no, I was clear. I know went through all this whole process. It makes your decision-making about that person simple, right? It becomes binary. It's only one of two things now. Either that person needs more training to accomplish the tasks that I'm asking them and need them to accomplish. No problem. Let's schedule more training. Or this person's already had multiple training sessions on this. Maybe they're not capable of performing this role within the company, and they need to either move to a new position that fits their skill set, or they need to leave the organization, right? It's only one of those two things. But if, as a leader, you don't follow this process and you're just kind of willy-nilly giving out instructions, you never know if that failure is a communication issue on your side, or whether you need to make an evaluation of that person. So you can't even evaluate the success or failure and potential of that individual if you don't have a clear way to ensure that you're clearly communicating expectations every time. So it's really a powerful tool, from your home with your teenage kids all the way to a Fortune 500 boardroom and strategic problem solving, if you want to evaluate and take action when someone does or does not meet your expectations.
And I like that, because that is actual true ownership, as opposed to just saying, oh, my bad, without knowing actually who's bad or where the ball was dropped. And it allows it for easily optimization. Like, okay, if I went through this, then I know how to optimize the solution. Like, is there lack of resources, like I mentioned, lack of training, is it the attitude problem? Is it the person? Is it whatever? All the factors that can be in part. So it allows you to assess parts of the process and identify, this is the gap, and fix that, as opposed to just saying, oh, well, let's try again, without just blindly continuing to go. And that's such a powerful strategy. But Sean, for all of our listeners out there, what's the best place for people to go to thank you for this episode and reach out to you?
Absolutely. So it's Sean Patton on LinkedIn. I'm under Sean Patton Presents. and Instagram, and Sean Patton on Facebook as well. And you can reach me on my email at strongerleaderssstrongerprofits@gmail.com. And the website is strongerleaderssstrongerprofits.com. And that's where, I've got some more details on the elite leadership workshops we do and some of the coaching and consulting and speaking that, we're staying busy with this time. So I really appreciate it, Ro.
No, I love it. I'll put all those links in the show notes. And Sean, thank you again, man.
Thanks. Take care, Ro.